need a little bit of throuple. I did not like it. I don't understand why people like it. Okay, that's not gonna work. So, let's go. 2022. In 2022, I read 92 books. Next to me, I have 80 of them. And today, I'm going to take you through all of the books I read this year, tell you if they were worth it, tell you how I enjoyed them, and tell you the bad things about some of them. I'm really appalled at seeing the visual of all of them together. Obviously I'm missing 12 books from this stack, but this gives you a good idea of all of the stuff I've read this year, and it's really appalling. I've just never put it all together, and I still have so much on my bookshelf, but it's really incredible to see how much I've read this year. It was hard to find everything, and it's made me realize the ones I don't have physically I really want to get. Definitely need to get into it. So I have it all organized by genre as best as I could. There's a couple stragglers that I found later that are just kind of misplaced, but this is all fantasy, mainly high fantasy. We go from Sarah J. Maas to Serpent and Dove to Jennifer Armentrout, just really classic fantasy books I've read this year. And then we have dystopians, sci-fi, and just random other fantasy fiction books. Then we have all of my Tamora Pierce books because I read so many of her books a year. And then we have from here at the bottom, we have witchy books, we have short stories, we have diverse fiction. This is all just mainly fiction, not entirely fantasy. And then over here at the corner one, we have romance. So we have some classic ones. We have Emily Henry books, Colleen Hoover books, and then we have some poetry and some nonfiction, and then we have graphic novels and a couple stragglers, memoirs, and fantasy. So real quick, before we get into all of the piles, I wanted to take you through the monthly breakdowns of the books I've read this year. So starting off in January, we read only 3 books. At the beginning of this year, I finally realized how much books were important to me, and I was like, oh, I want to read as much as possible this year. Set my goal for 50, and this happened. But yeah, it was the year I finally re-entered the book world. It's something I've been a huge part of ever since I was a kid. I've read so much. Middle school, I had a Bookstagram account and I wanted to be a booktuber. This year was the year where I finally really re-immersed myself into it. So January we read 3 books, February we read 6, March we read 7, April 8, May 9, June 9, July 13, August 12, September 4, which makes sense because September is when I moved back to school, and then October 10, November 6, and December 5, which makes sense again because I moved back to school and I'm in college, so that obviously takes priority and took so much of my time. I think that's incredible. It's always such a range between different months, but it was really fun. And obviously majority of the books I read are physical. The ones that are missing are either ones that I've given away, sold, or I read on my Kindle or audiobook. And there's a lot of those that I definitely want to bring up, which I will bring up later. Okay, we are gonna start. First, we have the Dance of Thieves duology. I really enjoyed this series. It's basically about an outlaw, a girl, and a guy that is the son of this very important estate, and their paths colliding. It was a really fun duology. Not my favorite fantasy book series ever, but it was a really fun read. I was captivated throughout it all, and the books are absolutely gorgeous. Okay, so then we have the Caraval series, which I read this summer. I read the first book in a day, or 2 days, and the rest subsequently in 2 days. Absolutely incredible. It is very fantasy related. It gives me Alice in Wonderland vibes. It's very mythical and magical, and I loved the characters they had in it and also the magic they had within it. Basically, it was kind of its own form of tarot, where it had these characters that came to life, and absolutely wonderful. I really enjoyed it. I would love to read this again. I really want to read the other series that Stephanie Garber has, the Once Upon a Broken Heart series, which is a spin-off of this, I believe, a character build off of this, so I really want to read that at some point, but a great fantasy series. Then we get into my love, Jennifer Armentrout. So these are 2 different series. This is The Light and the Flame is part of the prequel series. I don't have the first book, but I did read the first book this year. It is about one of the gods, the deities in this world, that it's about their story from obviously way before Poppy comes into play, but it's about that story, and it's absolutely lovely. I did not think I would love the prequel series as much as I would love the regular series, but this series just has such a special place in my heart, and I really want to reread it like from the beginning now that I like understand so much of the world, but that is very daunting considering most of the books are anywhere from 600 to 700 pages. But I will do it this summer, definitely. But A Light in the Flame was a really great book. I'm very excited for the third book to come out, and that I think once the third book comes out, I'll do a full reread and maybe I'll do a video on it. So this is a series I read at the very beginning of this year. I believe I read it around in March, and I was on a goose chase for this. So obviously the first book is Serpent and Dove, and it's about a girl that is a witch and she falls in love with a witch hunter, and it is the best thing ever. I absolutely loved the romance in it. It was funny, it was lighthearted, but also had, you know, important conversations, and it was so good. I had the first book and then I ran to the bookstore to get the second one and the third one and was just running everywhere trying to find them, and that's why I have a hardcover, because that's all they had and I needed to read it as soon as possible. But a great fantasy series, I highly recommend it. I don't know, I had so much fun with fantasy this year. I really broke out of like what I typically read, and I definitely want to read more fantasy in 2023, but I need to try some other things too. Okay, and then we have my love, Sarah J. Maas. So this book, A Court of Silver Flames, was a reread this year. I actually just finished it a couple weeks ago, and I loved it even more the second time. When I first read it, I read it in a very pivotal time in my life where I really related to what Nesta was going through, because I was working through a lot, and now that I'm healing a lot more from what I was working through, the book has like an entire new magic. I just absolutely love this book. It's my favorite book in the Court of Thorns and Roses series, and I absolutely want to reread the entire series again. There's so many things I want to reread this year, but an incredible book. I highly recommend you give it a chance, because Nesta is such a powerful character, and this story in this book is so beautiful. And then we have Crescent City, House of Sky and Breath. I pre-ordered this book. This is my year of pre-orders. There were 2, but I never pre-order, and I did this year. And gosh, what an incredible book. I love this story. This is the Crescent City series, which is the 3rd series by Sarah J. Maas, and it is more like technologically advanced and futuristic, and it's just so incredible. Obviously, like, it's hard for me to fully talk about these books because I feel like I've forgotten so much, but like, you can see how much this book is tabbed. I loved this book so much. I love Hunter, and I love Hunt, and I love Bryce, and I just love the characters in this book. I can find a lot of like qualities I relate to within these characters, so always so much fun to read. 1 out of 4 stacks is done. Okay, so I'm gonna start off with the books on the top. All of these, except for the Firestone, is Tamora Pierce, the one and only. So there are 2 series within here. There's Protector of the Small. It's about a girl that becomes a knight, and it's her adventures and her coming into her power, and it's just, I love the characters in these books, the relationships. Tamora Pierce is an incredible author and has so much wisdom, and I just absolutely love her works. I've breezed through these. I read these I think in June, and although they're pretty big, they are just so easy to read and so enjoyable, and I don't know, I just love Tamora Pierce books. You can get them on thrift books for really cheap, and they're really fun. So definitely something I would recommend you read. The universe goes in consecutive order, so there are different build-offs of different family lines, and they're all within the same universe, and it's just beautiful. And then we have Wild Magic, which is part of the Immortal series, which is about a girl that can talk to animals, and she kind of gets involved with these immortal creatures and the new political upheaval that occurs because of this. It's really interesting. It's really different than a lot of the other books, which is why it makes it really fun, but another really enjoyable. It is a trilogy, and I like the covers, even though they're very old style, but they're very fun. Kind of a random book in this stack, but The Night and Its Moon is a magical realism book about a girl that grows a rose from her wrist, and she's very weird for that, and there's a boy, I think, that comes out of a pumpkin. No, it's just a very magical realism book, a very short book, but if you're into magical realism or just whimsical allegories, it's so beautiful. I highly recommend it. It has a warm place in my heart. I feel like I would have loved it as a kid. Next we have Wolf Den by Elodie Harper. I got this at a little free library. It was something I never really heard of before, but I love stuff about ancient Rome and ancient Greek and stuff like that, and I'm always interested in finding more about this. This is set in ancient Rome, and it's about women in a brothel. It's honestly a character study. I did not enjoy it. I thought there was no plot, obviously, and I think there could have been a lot more conversation in this book about power and the struggles of women in that time, and it was just, it felt really flat, and I think it had so much potential, but it was not achieved, and I did not enjoy it, unfortunately, and I wish I did, but it is a character study, and if you go into it with that knowledge, maybe it would be more enjoyable, but I just couldn't find it within myself to enjoy this book. But the cover is really pretty. Next we have Aragon. I read this when I was a kid and I reread it this summer. It is very dense high fantasy, a lot of world building, a lot of new language, and something that is sometimes hard to grasp, but I loved it, and I have the second one and I want to read it at some point. So if you're looking for a classic fantasy kind of similar to like The Hobbit kind of, that's like kind of the vibe it gives me, I would highly recommend it. Okay, next we have the Shatter Me series. I'm missing one of them because my sister is reading them right now, but I loved these books. I actually have a couple videos of me reading these books, so if you want to watch those, go ahead. But I really enjoyed this series. I raced through it. I read the first book in a couple days and subsequently with the rest. So enjoyable, so fun. Obviously, like, there's some parts that are like, ugh, come on, but it is really fun, and it's just a good read, honestly. The 5th and 6th book kind of fall off a little bit, but I do think they're interesting to read and understand the progression of the story, because honestly, I'm not the type of person that can leave off. Even if the book isn't as great as the other ones, typically I want to keep going and understand how the world continues to build. So a very fun read. Obviously, like, I feel like these are reads that people read when they were preteens, but I did not. Like, I have such distinct memories of seeing it in the bookstore and like purposely not reading it, but I really enjoyed it. If you're looking for a quick fantasy dystopian fiction read, it is really enjoyable. It gives me similar vibes to like The Hunger Games or Divergent, kind of like, you know, that age era of reading and movies. Next we have Dune. You can see how loved this book was because of the spine. This was a chonky book. I enjoyed it. It's obviously very slow and it is really interesting to read. I think I read it after I watched the movie, so I already had like the images in my head, which I think helped a lot. If I had gone into it without having seen the movie, I think I would have had a really different take on this book. It is almost 900 pages. That's a lot, but it was really fun. I enjoyed it. It was very imaginative, obviously, and again, I think watching the movie helped a lot. I do want to read the other two at some point, but I don't know, they're very daunting. Next, we have The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. I have a reading challenge where I did this video in. It was swapping my screen time for reading time, so if you want to watch that, I will link it. This book is about the 5 boroughs in New York City personified and coming together to try to save their city from an alien. It was really interesting. It was really fun. I do think about it every once in a while. I did not absolutely love it, but I really appreciated the love that went into this book and just the time and care that went into this book, so I did really enjoy it. I think N.K. Jemisin is a brilliant writer. I just don't necessarily think her writing is for me because I have read a couple of her other books or tried to and haven't really enjoyed them. Next we have Brandon Sanderson, which is an author that I've read a lot of. Last year I read the Mistborn series, which I finished this year, and I really love his writing and I wanted to give this series a try. It is the Starsight series. I actually got both of these for free at a flea market, so a really awesome find. They were really good. I really liked them. Different than what I typically read. It is about a space pilot essentially, and the mechanics in the world are super interesting but easy to grasp, and the character relationships are interesting, and I love the spaceship. So if you're looking for a fantasy sci-fi series that isn't super daunting, I highly recommend these books because the world building is exquisite, but it's not hard to understand. So if you're looking for a good way to dip your toes into a sci-fi series, I think this could be for you. And the last of kind of the fantasy sci-fi area and dystopians, we have the Sith series. I really loved the first book. It's basically about people that are immortal, but there are people within the society that are sanctioned to kill, to regulate the population. It's about two people being brought into the system and becoming Siths, or into the Sithdom. And I loved the first book. It was so good, so much suspense, and the second one was great too. Throughout my read with the second book, it was going to be 3 stars until the end, so keep that in mind. It does like really build up until the end, so sometimes people don't enjoy that, but I really liked it, and I'm definitely going to read the third one, probably digitally, and give it a shot. But I do really like the concept of this book and the world building. I just think it became a little absurd in this one. 2 more piles. So then we have the Hero of Ages, which is the 3rd book in the Mistborn series. This is a very daunting series in terms of page number, and it's a slow series, but it has such good world building. Brandon Sanderson's an incredible author, and I really admire his work. So it was really fun series to read, and I do want to read more of his books, but it is a daunting series. There are so many lovable characters in this book, and it is really fun, and I loved the ending. But it is a daunting fantasy read. And of course you have to have a stack of books fall every time. It's fine. So then we have The Firestone by Tanya Huff. Somebody in my Twitch stream actually recommended this to me because they thought the author was similar to Tamora Pierce. It's about basically 3 different people coming together to find a stone. It like keeps the world together, and it's just about their relationships together. Can't remember too much of the book. I just remember that like there's like a little, it could be a little bit of throuple. I don't know. Interesting book, not my favorite. One of my favorite reads of this year. I'm gonna do a separate video where I go through my top 10 favorites of the year, so make sure to look out for that. It's likely coming after this video. The Color Purple by Alice Walker. It's an absolutely beautiful book, so beautifully written. The characters are lovely and the story is lovely. I highly recommend this book. You'll likely have seen the like purple cover. That's like the more updated cover, but this is a thrifted copy, and it is so beautiful. I don't know, it's just a wonderful book, and I really, really love it, and I would love to read more of Alice Walker's work. And then we have If Beale Street Could Talk by James Baldwin. I actually finished this book a couple weeks ago, and it was great. I really loved it. I watched the movie previously. I think that helped with kind of seeing this book, but I liked the book more than the movie, honestly, and it had so much depth and so much love, and I thought it was really interesting, and how the story was written and how it's not really about hope. I don't know, I have a lot to dissect with this book and a lot to think about, but James Baldwin is an incredible author. Next we have Under the Idolatry by Chinolo Akparanta. Sorry if I didn't pronounce this right. It is about a girl in Nigeria. It's inspired by Nigeria's folktales and its war, and it's so beautiful. It is an incredible book, and it is about love and just discovering yourself. It's a really beautiful book. Next we have Homegoing by Ya Gyasi. I'm so sorry if I pronounced that wrong. It's about 2 half-sisters and their paths diverging and their family lines spreading out. And it takes place in Ghana and then goes to the US in the era of slavery, and it's just about the family. It really just shows like generational trauma and generational lines and the way they diverge, and just absolutely beautiful book. I highly recommend it. So hard-hitting and powerful, and I read it in a couple days because it was just so beautiful. I highly recommend it. This sat on my shelf for years, and I'm so glad I read it, and if you've seen this around, because I have seen it popping up more in bookstores, I highly recommend it. Next we have The Downstairs Girl. I don't have much to say about this. I read this at the beginning of the year, and I didn't fully enjoy it. It was an interesting story, an easy read, but not something that really stuck with me. Next we have The Great Gatsby, which is another of my top reads this year. I have never read it before, and I read it this year, and I absolutely loved it. I want to read it again very soon because I want to see how my thoughts evolve as I understand the book more. A lovely book. I recommend. I know that a lot of us were maybe forced to read it, or we avoid it because it was an American English book that we were like in our curriculum, but I really recommend you give it a shot. Now we're just getting into general fiction. I don't really know what to call this genre, this area, but we have Kafka on the Shore by Haruki Murakami. This was my first Haruki Murakami book. I really liked it. It was hard for me to get into, but I really enjoyed it in the end, and I still think about it all the time. So really great Haruki Murakami book, and I have more to read soon. This is the first book I finished this year. A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I was gifted this for Christmas, and I absolutely loved it. It was really fun, really funny, really satirical, easy to read. Next we have Fahrenheit 451. Basically the book about the firefighter that destroys books. A great book. lots to think about. Next we have Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut. Another really great read. Very odd, but a book that like really sticks with you. Next we have Painting Time. It is not worth it. I don't know. I didn't enjoy it. It took me a couple days to read it, but it was not really, it fell apart. The first 100 book pages were incredible, and then it really fell apart and I couldn't follow the plot and I just didn't enjoy it anymore. I really wanted to love it because I really want to read more books about artists, like just books, fantasy fiction books, any book about artists that show their lives and the way we see the world. Just didn't do it for me. But then later on I read Just Kids by Patti Smith, and I feel like that did for me what this book lacked for sure. Next we have Freshwater by Akwaeke Emezi. I'm so sorry, I feel horrible. Really incredible. Really check the trigger warnings before you read this because it is a very triggering book in terms of content, but in terms of message, just really powerful and a really, really, really well done book. Next we have Sarah Land by Sam Cohen. This year I tried to get into shorter anthologies or collections of stories because I think those are really fun. This is one of them. I really enjoyed it, really fun. Not too much that sticks with me, but it was really fun. There's like a ton of Sarahs in this book. I still don't totally understand it. Next we have Tell Everyone on This Train I Love Them by Maeve Higgins. I'm conflicted on this book. I enjoyed it, but I don't know how I feel about the position of the author, and the title is a bit conflicting. I don't know, but I do think a lot of these stories are really incredible, and it's interesting to see a book about America from an Irish immigrant's perspective. I am on the fence about this book, but I do think it's an interesting read. It's a small book, not a well-known book. I just saw this in the bookstore and decided to pick it up. Next we have Shit Cassandra Saw, another short story book. The synopsis to this book is really interesting. Cassandra may have seen the future, but it doesn't mean she's resigned to telling the Trojans everything she knows. In this ebullient collection, virgins escape from being sacrificed, witches refuse to be burned, whores aren't ashamed, and every woman gets a chance to be a radioactive cockroach warrior who snaps back at catcallers. The synopsis of this book is incredible. I don't know if the book did that. Next we have Reminisce by Susanna Clark. An insane book. I did not expect this book to be what it was. I had no clue what the book was about. Once you get to the end, it is wild, and it kind of reminds me of The Secret History a little bit. I don't know, everything reminds me of that book right now because I'm reading it, but I do want to reread this because I know a ton of people loved it and I'm kind of on the fence about it. I think just because it was so absurd and not what I was expecting, but I do have really fond memories of the book. Next we have The Witch's Heart. I read this in like 2 days. It's basically about a woman who falls in love with Loki, and it's about like that story, and it's so beautiful, and there's a little gay subplot. It's a really incredible book. I think about it a lot. It's really fun. It makes my heart warm. It reminds me kind of Circe, but obviously this is Norse mythology. So another really great read. I would recommend this if you're looking for something different, and it's like the only Norse mythology book I've read before, so very fun. Next, we have my first ever V.E. Schwab read, The Near Witch. I did not love this book, but I love V.E. Schwab, so I'm gonna continue reading her work. I have one of her other works on my shelf that I really want to get to, but it's a good fall read, but I think the trope might be slightly overdone. Yeah, that's all I have to say. Next, you have Circe by Madeline Miller. First off, look at this cover. Isn't that beautiful? A really lovely read. I didn't love it as much as Song of Achilles, but I think that's just because Song of Achilles will always have such a special place in my heart. Just a really great exploration of the tropes in this book. Final book on the stack, it's a witchy read, The Once and Future Witches. I didn't love this book. I don't think it was super well done, and the plot was a little off, but a fun read. Not something I'm upset that I read, but just not something that stuck with me. Okay, and then finally, for this stack, I'm just including this, Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. A great book. I loved it. This is my first time reading John Green since I was like a teenager, like a preteen. It felt like the most personal to John Green and just like the most human, and I really loved it. Next we have Gods of Jade and Shadow by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. I didn't love this book. I thought it was really slow, and I thought the world building was a little off, and it was just really slow. Next we have A Torch Against the Night. This was a reread, and I really enjoyed this. I am so fond of this series mainly for nostalgia reasons because I read this when I was younger and I still think about it a lot. Okay, this is kind of funny going down this way. Taste by Stanley Tucci. I read this on an audiobook and I just got a physical copy and I'm so excited. A really fun book, really good. I loved it. I highly recommend it. It is probably one of my favorite memoirs. I haven't read many memoirs. This is kind of my introduction, but an incredible book. There are recipes in it, and I can't wait to use the recipes. I don't know, a lovely book, and I can't wait to read through it and write down all of my annotations. Heartstopper. What is there not to love about this book, about these graphic novels, about this show? Incredible. If you have not read them, they're absolutely worth the hype. Get them, please, if you can, or read them on Webtoon, I think. Amazing. I love them. They make my heart so happy and make my heart so warm, and I love the copies we got. My sister and I split these, and they're the best. I literally read these in the car because we had been just randomly picking up the third and fourth book, and I read them in the car and I loved it. Okay, not saying much about this. I hated this book. Absolutely hated this book. I had to read it for a presentation in one of my classes. Really bad. I didn't like it. This is probably my least favorite book of the year. No. Nonfiction, How the Word Is Passed by Clint Smith. Incredible. I highly, highly recommend this book. It is basically, he goes to a bunch of different historical sites in the US and documents the way the stories are told, and it based on different perspectives of history, and it's incredible. I highly, highly recommend this book. It is historical but beautifully written and just incredible. Just Kids by Patti Smith. I need to reread this because I did not love the book as much as I think I should have, and as much as people do. I loved the first 150 pages, and then I kind of fell out of love with it, but I know how influential this book is to so many people, and I want to give it another shot. Next we have Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. So I loved the first book, absolutely adored it, and then the second book was fine. Third book wasn't too great, so I would not read the third book if you want to love this series, because it made me kind of icky about the series. Not that there's anything particularly icky about the books. The third book, I just don't think it matched with the rest of the series, and I think it overdid what was unnecessary. So I don't recommend reading the third book, but absolutely read the first book and maybe the second if you'd like. So in this year, I reread a bunch of the poetry books that I have had since I was in middle school. These are all of them, but they're most of them. I reread Rupi Kaur's work. Really great, kind of simple, but I know how influential she is, so they were fun. But then recommended to me by a lovely friend, No Matter the Wreckage by Sarah Kay. A really, really great collection of poems. I loved this, and I think the illustrations in it are really fun as well. Each chapter or section has illustrations that pertain to all of the poems within. Next, in kind of the final section, is TikTok books and romance books. So first, Sally Rooney. Again, probably my second least favorite book of this year, or read of this year. I did not like it. I don't understand why people like it. I think it was harmful, and I think it was poorly written, and I think it's a bad book. Wow, that was harsh, but it's true. Next we have It Ends With Us, which after lots of research and lots of soul searching and just kind of understanding people's perspectives, I think Colleen Hoover is kind of harmful, but I don't want to get into that. So I loved it initially, but now I'm conflicted. That's all I'm gonna say. Maybe we'll get into this in another video. In 5 years, I read this in November as I ran into books at my cabin and borrowed one from my sister. I read this in a day. I liked it. It was fun. It was sweet. Not anything incredible. I don't know. It's a romance book. It's simple. It's sweet. It's set in New York City. I do think the concept of the book is really incredible, and kind of the suspense you feel in the beginning and then figuring it out in the end. Really great and really well done. Next we have my love, Emily Henry. I still have not read People We Met on Vacation, but I read these two this year, Book Lovers and Beach Read. I liked Beach Read more than Book Lovers, and I was watching somebody else's review video, and I'm so sorry I don't remember who it was. Maybe it was Haley Pham, but they were saying that they wish that Book Lovers had been about two book lovers instead of publishers, and I actually really agree with that, but this was a really lovely book. I just think that I had high hopes for what it was, and that's not actually what it was, but it was a great book, and I love Emily Henry, and I can't wait to read more of her work. And the final physical book I have is Red, White, and Royal Blue, which I read, just gonna put that there. I read it at the end of this year, it was, I think, the last book I finished in 2022, and I absolutely loved it. I am sad that I waited so long to read it because it is absolutely incredible. The romance is lovely, but also just the hope that is illustrated in this book. As someone who's heavily involved in just politics and advocacy, and is just like hyper aware of everything, reading a book about political hope and change was just so lovely, and it didn't feel like it was so out of reach. Alright, that's it for the physical books. We're gonna quickly get into other books that I do not have with me. I'm like literally like surrounded by a blockade of books right now. There are a few books that I did not have physically that I want to talk about. So we have Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I read that this year. I really enjoyed it. I think it was really good. I know there's a lot of discourse about some of the problematic nature of the book, and I'm very open to it and want to understand that, so I do think maybe I should reflect more on that book and understand the ways in which it was harmful, but I did read it. And then we have I Felt a Funeral in My Brain, which is a poetry book that I've had on my shelf since my like preteen poetry phase, but I never read it, and I read it this year. It's by Will Walton. Absolutely incredible. I highly recommend it. I really loved it. It's about grief and trauma and healing and being a young kid, and it was really incredible. And then there's Her Body and Other Parties, which is a short story book about women and women archetypes and just these incredible stories. There's so many of those stories have stuck with me. I wish I had my copy with me because I want to reread it. It's in my dorm, but an incredible book. I highly, highly recommend it because it has stuck with me. I remember when I bought it, I was at a bookstore in DC and somebody came up to me and saw it in my hand. I was like, oh my god, you're gonna love that book, and I absolutely did. And then finally, one of the last books I'll mention, I'm Glad My Mother Died by Jeanette McCurdy. Incredible book, so powerful and hard-hitting, and I'm really glad she shared her story and glad she's getting her flowers and what she deserves, and I'm so sorry that happened to her, but I'm so glad she shared it, and I don't know, I just want to see her thrive. 92 books, 34,143 words, and an endless love for books. I'm so impressed and proud of myself for having read this much this year. After going through all of these physically and seeing all I've read, it just rekindles my love for books, obviously, and I've read so many incredible books this year, and I'm so excited to what I read in the next year. I already have so many books I can't wait to read. This was really fun to go through. I hope maybe you gained some inspiration if there's anything in these you saw valuable that you would like to read. I don't know. Very fun. Let me know if you read any of these books. What do you love? And yeah. Next video I'm going to do is my top 10 favorites that I read this year, so make sure to stay tuned for that. But this was incredible. I can't believe I read 90 books this year. I don't know how many books I will read in 2023, but that is yet to be, and I'm excited to continue this journey and share it with all of you. So thank you so much for being here. I hope you have an amazing 2023, and let's make it a good one. I love you guys. I'll see you soon. Bye!